To become a very developed and a very powerful nation, economically speaking, it's not simply a matter of infrastructure or economic growth or even business creation, or it has nothing to do with how industrialized your economy is. I mean, all these elements are very critical, are very important in helping your country meeting its development goals. But today, I want you to take a look at a very original way of actually portraying your country as a developed nation, or at least putting your country on the international map. I want you to focus and I want you to look at the power of international events. How likely is your country to be able to host an international event, and how likely your country can actually work its international image so that it can be able to portray some level of serenity, some level of development, and some level of economic maturity. Welcome to your favorite podcast, Smart Intellectual, Knowledgeable African. I'm Philippe S.I.K.A. I know it's been a couple of months since the last episode that I actually shared with you, and I think the reason why I decided to take my time, it's simply because I was working on this new version of S.I.K.A. Talks. I wanted to be able to offer you the best analysis. I also wanted to be able to select the most interesting topic and, as always, provide you with the most original and the most powerful perspectives. Another reason is that I was also enjoying myself, while attending the latest African Cup of Nations, which my country actually did win. So congratulations to myself, congratulations to all Ivor, and congratulations to everyone who actually attend and watch the game, locally or remotely. If you're not yet a member of this amazing community, let me invite you to click on the subscribe button so that you don't miss out on the very interesting episode. In the meantime, please do not forget to activate the ring bell so that you are actually receiving the latest notification whenever I'm uploading and sharing new powerful perspectives with you. Well, we are already at the end of March 2024, but I believe that since this is the very first episode of 2024, I'm going to take a few seconds to wish you a happy new year. I'm a strong believer of upholding tradition and being conservative, especially when we're talking about, like very good habits, such as wishing people a happy new year, because I want you to be successful in this year. I want you to be able to attain your goals and objectives. So since this is the very first episode of 2024, happy new year, and all the best to you and your loved ones. I think from the introduction, you have a sense of the first topic that I want to discuss. But let me give you a small rationale here. Why did I decide to actually talk about my personal analysis of the African Cup of Nations? For some of you, you may think that there is no link between economic development and the AfCON. Some of you may also think that there's no link between sport and economic growth. And to some extent, I am inclined to say that this is not true. There is actually a very powerful nexus between economic growth and sport development. And this is what I'm going to try and explain and share with you throughout this very interesting episode. The first element I want to actually discuss is the total cost or the financial aspect, of the AfCON. It is actually public information. The total amount of hosting the AfCON was estimated at 1.5 billion euros. That's a lot of money. If I were to convert that currency, that amount of money into the local currency, we would have to add a lot of zeros. So I think for sake of clarity and conciseness, we are going to stick with the amount, in euro, in international currency. So the first element I want you to keep in mind is that it's very expensive for a country to actually host an international sport event. I don't have the official figure yet for the Olympic Games that are actually due to happen in July or June this year, but I'm pretty sure the bill is going to be more expensive and more important, far more larger than the one regarding the African Cup of Nations. So the question we want to ask ourselves is why countries do invest, do spend so much money when it comes to hosting international sport events. What's the rationale? What's the benefit? What are the advantages for the host nation, for the local people, to actually allow their public money to be used towards like hosting international events? And that question becomes more critical for countries such as developing nations like Ivory Coast, like Senegal, like Rwanda, and etc. Because we are already in a landscape, or in the financial landscape, or in the financial state actually, that actually portrays our countries as already poor country. So the logical question would be, why would a poor nation spend that much money in hosting an international sport event such as the African Cup of Nations? Well, I just told you that the AfCON 2023 costed 1.5 billion euros to the Ivorian government, i.e. to the Ivorian people, because we're talking about like public money with a mix of international loan from DFI, development financial institutions. So why would the local authorities invest so much money when they could have actually transferred or actually spent that money on other economic sectors such as health, education, transport, etc.? This is a legitimate question. Well, let me stop you there. It is not bad and it is not wrong, for a government to actually spend some percentage of its budget, or some percentage of its national revenue or its national money towards the hosting of international event. The first benefit when deciding to make such a move is the international reputation. And the international reputation is very important because we're talking about countries that are actually on the verge of becoming emerging economies. And one of the very critical and one of the very important tests that you need to actually pass in order to actually prove to the international market that your economy has reached some level of maturity is to also be able to irradiate some level of certainty, some level of economic serenity. You need to show that you have actually reached a level where you can, commit to larger spending, where you can also commit to larger economic responsibilities while being able to also offer larger profit and larger return. So coming back to the African Cup of Nations, the 1.5 billion euros were actually used towards infrastructure, the financing of public infrastructure. And when we talk about public infrastructure here, we need to differentiate infrastructure that have a direct link with soccer and infrastructure that actually have an indirect link with soccer. And when I talk about indirect link, I'm talking about infrastructure that even a non-soccer fan or a non-soccer person would actually benefit from that kind of investment. And we're talking about roads here, we're talking about bridges, we're talking about like hotels, we're talking about like all sort of accommodation that were built, in order to first accommodate the local people, but also accommodate the high number of international, visitors that were expected, throughout the competition. The second type of infrastructure that I just mentioned, which I call direct infrastructure with direct, benefit on the soccer, economic sector, I'm referring to stadiums. For the hosting of the African Cup of Nations, the government had to actually build five new stadiums, from the ground up, and they had to renovate one stadium. So overall, we're talking about like new infrastructure that are first going to deliver a high quality level, in terms of stadiums, produced locally, but they're also going to be able to support and boost, the local soccer ecosystem. So these are actually the first aspect we need to look at. The second beneficial and the second interesting aspect when hosting such an event is the economic, boosting that is going to actually produce locally. It's going to actually be a strong economic driver for local businesses, for local entrepreneurs. And we've seen a surge of business creation during the African Cup of Nations. We've seen a surge of consumption in terms of like the clothes, in terms of clothes, in terms of shoes, in terms of gadget, in terms of food, in terms of accommodation, in terms of like anything that you can think of. We've seen a surge in terms of consumption, like consumers went literally beyond their budget. Consumers were literally willing to overpay. And we've also noticed that kind of, strong economic drive around, the stadium tickets. People were willing to actually pay 10 times the initial value just to be able to go and watch their team. Well, for the record, I am not encouraging that kind of behavior because I personally think that it is really like a shameful, behavior, because you are actually making, unsolicited profit. Look, okay, I'm kidding. But I mean, overall, I don't agree with that because I think it was too much. Like, there's no reason for you to sell like a soccer ticket like 10 times, from the initial price. But anyway, we're talking about economic drive and we are living in a capitalistic society. So we're talking about basic capitalistic principles, the law of demand and the law of supply. So whenever, the demand is higher versus the supply, well, price is going up. So that's what we saw, in Ivory Coast during the African Cup of Nations. And in my opinion, that was one of the most interesting and one of the most important benefit of hosting the AfCON. Another benefit, as I mentioned, is the international reputation. Ever since, the concluding of the AfCON, we've noticed that, the reputation of the country and the international image of the country is actually way better. Prior to the AfCON, whenever you wanted to actually point Côte d'Ivoire on the map, you had to use, one reference, and that was the former striker Didier Drogba, who actually used to play at Chelsea. And he is still one of the greatest legends, of the nation and of the country. But I mean, for a country to also be able to reach another level, it does not look good that the only reference is a human being. The only reference is an individual. A country should be known for itself, which is actually what we see when you think of the United States of America, when you think of France, when you think of Germany, when you think of Japan. You don't put a person face first, or you don't put an individual name first. You put the country name first. You know the country because they actually achieved one of the most important, prowess that mankind has ever seen. So that is the same analysis when it comes to Cote d'Ivoire. And thanks to the hosting of the African Cup of Nations, now the name and the reputation of the country, like are able to go beyond, the national borders. So, and this is very important. And this is a very important and this is a very powerful tool because at the international level, whenever your country is in need of additional financial support, international investors and international creditors need to be sure about your reputation. And another good consequences of hosting the AfCON is the recent credit ratings upgrading, from Moody's. Moody's decided to actually take the Cote d'Ivoire credit ratings and move it from BA3 to actually BA2. And this is very, very, very good, for economic development. This is very good for access to international capital because now it sends a strong signal to international investors and to international markets to say that thanks to the previous, economic achievement and thanks to the current economic achievement, the current economic landscape, the Ivorian, the Ivorian people and the Ivorian nation is now ready, to access, another level of public capital and international investment. So overall, what I want you to understand is that you may consider yourself as a developing country. You may be in a situation where you may consider that the sport sector has nothing to bring to your economy. But I want you to understand that no matter how good you are doing in terms of industries, in terms of manufacture, you have to, create and design strong policies that are going to also portray and send a strong signal, in terms of your international and your country reputation worldwide. And one of the best, medium of communication nowadays is through sports, culture, and, cinema. So, in my opinion, for a country such as Cote d'Ivoire to position itself, within the landscape of great nation, within the landscape of, great economy that have been able, to host international events and to host international people for, a specific period of time is actually sending a very good signal. Of course, there are and there will always be room for improvement, but I think the purpose of this episode is to show you that there is a strong nexus between sport development and economic development. But you have to meet one condition. You have to be serious about it, and you also have to invest the right amount of money, the right amount of time, the right amount of skills in order for you to actually arrive at a final product that's going to be a complete success. And in case of complete success, you will definitely see, like a strong improvement in terms of international perception from international creditors, international investors, and also international market, which is when the time is right, is going to be very important and very, critical for, you to be able to support your economy and have the right amount of money to invest in your private and local economic sector. I hope you've enjoyed this episode. I personally did. And I'm pretty sure you also did enjoy this episode. Again, I'm very happy to be back. And thank you for your support. Thank you for listening to your favorite podcast, Smart, Intellectual, Knowledgeable African, the podcast where strong reality always meet powerful perspectives. À bientôt.